Say back in the hall later, but let's take a look at an issue that's being debated here today. Controversial plans to deal with terrorism, including increasing the 28-day detention period without charge, are under the spotlight here in Aviemore at the SNP conference. Delegates will hear that current anti-terror laws, in the party leadership's view, unfairly affect ethnic minorities, in particular the Muslim community, and are gradually eroding civil liberties. I'm joined now by Humza, Yousaf and by Stewart, Hosie MP. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Humza, describe to me the concern you have about the impact on the Muslim community of the atmosphere, if you like, of the clampdown upon terror.
Well, the impact is simple. The anti-terror laws will not be anti-terror laws. They will actually increase terror if they are seen to be applied, executed, and in fact executed in the media as well, in terms specifically indiscriminately towards the Muslim community. If, for example, young Muslims are seeing that there's one law for them and there's one law for other people in the way of the application of the law, then it's going to increase anger among the young Muslim community, and most rational people will be able to deal with that anger.
Is it fair to say there is one law for one section? I mean, there will be one law which will apply to everyone, and if you are abiding by the law of the land, then presumably you would face no problem.
If you take an example, Miles Cooper, the school caretaker, the famous letter bomber, or infamous letter bomber, set 7 letter bombs, injuring 8 people. He was called a terrorist by the presiding judge, and yet wasn't tried under anti-terror legislation, but the Explosives Act, something that was back in the days of Guy Fawkes. It seems that there's an incredible anomaly between who it's applied to and how it's applied. Now, what we're getting is that you must have anti-terror legislation. You must have it because we have to recognise the international terrorist threat, the indiscriminate killing that we have. But you have to apply it in such a way that that can't be used by extremists, by terrorists, as fodder to radicalise youth again.
But Stuart, Hosie, just turning to the way that Westminster deals with this, you're a Westminster MP, proposals to increase detention without charge. Government ministers defend that by saying there is a real and present threat facing the UK, and they will be negligent if they didn't take every step to deal with it.
There is a real and present threat. It's the biggest threat we have to face. The problem is that they did not approach this by saying we need to deal with the terror threat. Tony Blair said 90 days or bust. It's a binary issue. They refused to look properly at post-charge questioning as an alternative. They didn't give any serious consideration to using wiretap intercept evidence. They haven't even answered the points of law that would it breach the right against arbitrary detention. Indeed, more frightening, would evidence actually be admissible in a court of law? Now, the good news is there will be a government plan out before Christmas. I suspect 90 days is dead, and they will be talking about 28 days in extremis, once or twice a year only. That's the kind of language we'll hear. But we need to be part of the discussion to make sure all of the securities, all of the protections are put in place there, so we don't throw out with the next set of proposals the rights and liberties we're meant to be defending, which would have been the impact if the 90-day plan had gone ahead.
Society has to balance, governments have to balance liberty against security, but don't you accept that the current security threat, I mean, some disowned the security threat. They said it wasn't as big as the government was stressing. Well, surely the events of the bombings in London and the attempted bombing in Glasgow disprove that.
I have never said that. I have always said to this party it's the biggest threat the world faces. I'm absolutely certain about that. Now, we want to listen to what the government have to say, but we also want to make sure we make the case for proper judicial oversight, for proper parliamentary scrutiny. If there is 28-day plus detention, we want to be in these discussions to see where that takes us. But we're certainly going to oppose 90 days. That was political. It had nothing to do with national security.
Do you agree with Humza that there is a potential and maybe even real discrimination against the Muslim community?
I think the IRA said internment was the best recruiting sergeant they ever had. That's always a very real danger. A very real danger indeed, yes. Humza.
Yeah, I mean, it is the perception. I mean, it may not be being applied discriminately, but certainly if that perception continues the way it's going, then Muslims and young Muslims will pick up on that.
Explain to me what you mean by that. What does that mean in practice? How does it affect the community in practice?
Well, I mean, as the example I gave to you before, for Miles Cooper, young Muslims see that, then they're going to be asking the question, well, why was this guy not tried under terrorism legislation? And if there's a case again in the future where it's somebody who's not Miles but is Muhammad, and he is tried under anti-terror legislation, again, they'll be asking, why is there this kind of discrimination? And when they see cases where somebody hasn't had an active plot, has been foolish, has been young, and then tried on anti-terrorism legislation and has a higher sentence than most other cases of, for example, manslaughter.
Well, I know the recent case to which you're referring.
But then people start to see this kind of anomaly, and it really angers them. Like I said, a lot of people can vote that anger in a democratic way, in a correct manner, but a lot of people will not be able to do that.
But there is terrorism, isn't there, of a nature that is from people who avowedly espouse Islam, and I stress avowedly with caution. Do you think that the Muslim community should or could or can do more to condemn that sort of behaviour, or do you feel they're doing?
The Muslim community.
I see you smiling because I know that you're.
No, because the Muslim community does so much. I think already when it comes to when something, we shouldn't have to apologise. Extremism is a problem for every member of the community, and not just that. When you take, for example, the recent example you referred to, the Glasgow bombings that happened. The Muslim community was the first to organise Alex Salmond to come, for example, the First Minister to come to the Central Mosque and address the people. The Muslim community were the first to get the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, to sit down with young Muslim youth groups to tackle the issues that they might have had with the police. And on top of that, the Muslim community were the ones who brought all communities from Scotland together in the Scotland United Against Terror rally that happened the week after in order to condemn, leading from the front, but saying it's not just our problem. Extremism is a problem that indiscriminately kills everybody and has to be taken on by everybody.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, we are very fortunate in Scotland. The community relations, by and large, are very, very good indeed. And in tackling a threat, a very real threat, and looking at any legislation the government brings forward, we need to make sure there's a balance so that the rights and liberties for everybody, be they Muslim or non-Muslim, are protected while ensuring the correct legislative framework is there to tackle the real threat that comes from a tiny number of people.
Humza, you made the point just earlier that there can be a radicalisation of sectors of the Muslim community if they feel there is discrimination. How can that be avoided in your view?
Well, part of it is down to the law that is there. It has to be shown to be fair. It has to be shown to be applied to everybody. It can't just be shown to be discriminately applied as well. But at the same time, I think the Muslim community, and we are starting to get into this mode of thinking that we have to look into ourselves and see, look, have an honest debate. Look, this is happening, this radicalisation. We can't bury our head in the sand. And the way we're going to deal with it is promote democracy, the democratic way of doing things as well. But at the same time, like I said, it's not a problem for us. That's one side. The Muslim community will take care of that. Trust me, there's already been plenty of moves in that direction. But it's only going to work if the politicians do not discriminately apply the law, and the authorities do not discriminately apply the law. That is what is of utmost paramount importance. And because we know that the root of extremism really is the double standards that are being seen worldwide.
Are you saying there is a potential problem for the law to be applied in a discriminatory fashion, or are you saying it's actually happening now?
I mean, in my opinion, I see it that it seems to be happening currently, but I guess it would be perhaps jumping the gun slightly. I mean, we need to look at other cases, and we need to see how time. But what we need to do is nip it in the bud. Actually, we need to make sure that it doesn't have that potential to do that. And like Stewart is mentioning, there needs to be kind of more democratic, more transparent measures within the anti-terrorism legislation, judicial review, parliamentary scrutiny, and these kind of things.
So, on balance, you believe that the new measures likely to come forward will address the issue in a way that suits your concerns?
I think 90 days is dead. I think the baseline proposal will be 28 days plus in extremis. Now, as to whether the measures do what I want them to do, that's why we need to be in the discussions, to make sure the judicial scrutiny is right, the parliamentary oversight is right, the legal framework is right, and that's where we want to go in the run-up to Christmas.
Stewart, Humza, thank you both very much indeed for joining me to discuss that issue.